Is Donald Trump an anarchist?
No, no. I mean, Donald Trump is a classic corporatist. It's actually really interesting. When I say corporatist, I mean in the old-fashioned mid-20th century sense. The corporatists are people who say that employers and employees have common interests with each other against finance. Essentially, this is the soul of most social democracy. Keynes talked about the euthanasia of the rentier class as this kind of feudal leftover. Galbraith talked about the technostructure, that in corporations, there's a natural common interest around the thing that the corporation does. So they all tend to see outsiders as interlopers and interfering. So social democracy had a certain degree of corporatism, but of course so did fascism, where you say the financiers are all Jews and try to kill them. Um, it's tends to be a form of political mobilization that lends itself to a certain form of nativism, at least, and racism, nationalism at worst. Now, Trump clearly made an appeal to that. He's a classic corporatist in that sense. And I think it's fascinating that he arrives at the moment he did, because for me, what Trump represents is the divorce between finance and real estate. Um, Historically, real estate has been that sector of the capitalist class that has been, little known fact, most willing to fund left-wing candidates. In the 70s and 80s, they did. People like Harkin got all their money from real estate interests. And the reason for that is fairly obvious. They can't export their product. They have something they're selling that they want everybody to be able to buy. So they have an interest in people being able to afford a house. So what you have under financialization with subprime mortgages is a kind of deal between finance and real estate. You don't need to fund general prosperity. We can just lend them the money. Now, of course, that all blows up in 2008. So you can say Donald Trump's campaign represents the divorce. That he's a construction and real estate guy, and he runs against finance on a classic corporatist ticket. Hillary Clinton is here. She's represents finance, and she also represents empire, right? She's the one who claims she wants to start the wars, because in America, financial structure and the military, the overseas empire is basically the same thing. American global finance is the tribute-taking agency for the American empire. That's how it works. So Hillary represented that. You have this paradoxical situation where the fascist guy is running as the peace candidate, because that's what the corporatists will do. He teams up with Peter Thiel, and who's the I want to move from Silicon Valley to actually making futuristic technologies
Sure.
and go into outer space and whatnot. So Trump is futuristic technologies, real estate, construction. That's why he wants to build a wall, because construction is the solution to all problems. It's also a Keynesian employment thing, which you can actually get past Republicans. Yeah,
Okay, so he's a corporatist,
yes.
and interesting that you.
Old-fashioned mid-century Keynesian nativist. Yeah.
Okay, and so they used to fund the left-wing candidates.
All right.
So almost explains the reason why he was friends with Hillary for so long, and then afterwards, as you
Yeah.
said, he said, "I'm against finance now."
Yeah.
Marine Le Pen. Would you say that this is a very similar thing, or
Well,
completely
she's an
different
old-fashioned
because of the deregulation?
fascist. Fascists were always corporatists. And one of the reasons why fascists are doing so well in Europe is for that reason. They're the only people who can still put out a sort of 1940s, 1950s style economics, which is all about welfare state, full employment, so forth and so on.
Something that I noticed when I watched Nigel Farage interview Marine Le Pen
Yes.
was the difference in their views on deregulation. Trump openly loves deregulation, so does Farage, and Marine Le Pen says that she's completely against it.
Which is fascinating because, I mean, the phrase deregulation is such a sort of ideological, I mean, it's nonsense. I mean, I looked into this, and essentially, it's all about getting in the first claim. They always say in law, it's like who sues who first, or claims damages first is 98% of everything. It's the same thing. Who gets to claim their legislative change is a deregulation rather than a regulation, is sets the entire argument. So that in America, you had the deregulation of the banks and the deregulation of the telecommunications industry. In the telecommunications case, it was getting rid of a managed competition between a few oligopolies and opening up to like a lot of mid-range firms competing with each other. In banks, it's exactly the other way around. They start with a bunch of mid-range firms competing with each other, or the airlines, I'm sorry, banks too, and they end up with a few oligopolies. So either one is called deregulation. They're exactly the opposite thing. So all that deregulation means is changing the regulatory structure in a way I like.
Right, so deregulation can be consolidation and deregulation can be competition.
Exactly. It's not about getting rid of government interference because, let's face it, banks can't actually be deregulated. Banks are institutions that governments give the right to make up money. You can't say you can make up money any way you like. That would be absurd. Then they just print money and keep it. Banks are intrinsically regulated. Their very existence has to be regulated. They are themselves a form of regulation.
What's going to happen in the US with the fact that Trump went for this left wing thing, for unions and stuff like that? Where do you see all that going?
I mean, it's interesting. I mean, it's clear that he was serious, at least at first, about trying to do what he said he was going to do. You could tell because he got all these crazy people to be his, deputies and his major officials. He chose the kind of people you would choose if you wanted people that didn't have loyalty to the institution, but would actually be loyal to you personally because you're trying to shake things up. It's clear that there's been a battle and he's given ground on most of that stuff. Which is too bad because, even though, he's an evil racist bastard, but it's also true that if anybody is going to be able to dismantle the American empire, it would have to be a right-wing populist. Left-wingers wouldn't be allowed to get away with it.
I noticed that Gillian Tett did an article on. She said that they're all distressed debt people in his. She didn't say all, but she said that the Trump crew in Parliament or in government, they're distressed debt. They're ex-distressed debt. I call them buyout people or private equity people.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Because I know that Nigel.
He got a lot of Goldman Sachs people. So there's a big question. Is he just trying to buy them off, or was he just lying about the whole thing? I mean, it is true that with a Republican Congress, how can you get a sort of Keynesian make-work program through? Well, there's only two ways. You could do military spending, and he says he's going to double the size of the army despite the fact that he doesn't want to fight as many people. So that's a good sign that it's all actually a work program. But also that construction thing. You can play on racism, which is what he did, and say, oh, we're going to build a wall, which everybody realizes is a completely ridiculous symbolic thing. But it's a vast make-work construction project you could get past a Republican Congress.
Okay.
Fixing the roads and bridges that you need to do, you can't get through to those guys.
And then in terms of the debt that he's going to get into, you've written a book about debt. So that debt, how's he going to do it and what's he going to do?
Well, America is in the best possible condition. I mean, America can try to destroy the value of the dollar and probably wouldn't be able to do it. I mean, there's some signs they did try at certain points. Because America has this enormous advantage, which is that the more unstable the world is, the more dollars people buy, and it props up the currency. So, if he figured out various ways to subtly default. There's a million ways to do it. I mean, most of the U.S. debt is owed to itself, right? I mean, it's owed to institutions within the system. They could cancel a lot of that out really easily. A lot of it's internal bookkeeping money, and that they're just using on paper for political advantage. And Trump actually said this. This is one of the interesting things during the campaign. He broke a lot of taboos, but some of them were saying things that are just obvious lies. But some of them were saying things that are actually true that you're not supposed to say. And one of them was that the U.S. can't really default on its debt.
As in, it's impossible for it to do it.
Yeah, because they could just make up a way of printing money and giving it to itself, and the money would still be good because the more instability they create, the more the dollar's worth.
Sure. Yeah. This might sound incredibly technical, and yes. I'm not, I'm not asking you to explain it, but they said that the Federal Reserve is sitting on $4.5 trillion worth of bonds. Probably U.S. bonds.
Yes, that's right. That's what I meant by. That's what I mean by it's owed to itself.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah. So they've been getting high off their own supply.
Yeah.
And then they're now saying they might want to start offloading some of that. What does that mean? And can it be believed?
I don't know. I mean, it's clear that if he wants to do an export-driven industrialization drive, he's got to lower the value of the dollar. And he said that, I'm for a strong dollar because everybody has to say they're for a strong dollar, but not really. Because a strong dollar is in the interest of finance. It's essentially a tribute-taking mechanism again, if the dollar is seniorage is the term they like to use. That a lot of the economic advantage of the U.S., the reason why they can keep more things flowing into the country than is flowing out, is owing to seniorage, which is like the fancy, you're not supposed to know what it means, word for being the guy who gets to say what money is. So America can just set it up to their advantage any way they like and have traditionally done so. Michael Hudson has written about this at length ever since '73. The American government basically uses treasury bonds and to sort of determine how the international financial system works to their advantage. People let them get away with it because so far there's no alternative system that won't be more to somebody else's disadvantage that would object.
In the dollar system.
Yeah, in the dollar system. But no, it creates a problem for people like Trump because if he wants to revive American industry, well, you got to export some of that stuff to somebody, unless you're going to do pure import substitution. And then you need a weak dollar.
Okay.
But he can't lower the dollar.
Well, I understand that he said we need to weaken the dollar, and then Mnuchin, his treasury guy, ex-Goldman and all that, he said
the opposite, of course.
He said the opposite, yeah. One of the other things that's going on is this 15% corporation tax. He's saying that he wants to cut it from 35 down to 15.
Which is the stupidest thing you could
bottom,
possibly do if you want to increase actual investment by corporations. I mean, at this point, they know this, and I don't know if he's just deluded or he really does not want to reindustrialize, because the point at which the U.S. did the most technological research and had the most productive corporations was when the tax rates were highest. The reason you had Bell Labs in the 50s was they had like a 90% tax rate on the highest brackets of income, and they had like a 60%, I can't remember what it was, a corporate tax rate. It was very high. So, at a certain rate of profits, you're not going to keep it anyway. So people would say, okay, we'll give higher wages to our workers, make them happy. Why not give it to them instead of the government? Or they'd say, we'll invest it in research because we can write that off. So, there was a massive amount of internal research and also just, general improvement of productivity because it paid to invest in that. You end up having to give it in taxes anyway. The more the taxes go down, the more they just take that money and put it in financial stuff instead, basically trapping other people in debt and extracting rents of one kind or another. So lowering the tax rate is just going to cause them to invest even less in productivity and more in sort of predatory activities.